Well, hello, Alex Ackerman.
Hello, Mrs. Donna Ackerman. How are you?
Good. I just wanted to let everybody know that I am taking over the host spot for just this week only. And I'll be talking to Pastor Alex Ackerman from Vineyard Longmont about spiritual gifts.
Well, the first question we've asked the strangers is, do our words have power? And I think uh, most of us know that our words have power from when we say something stupid, and or we say something and realize that we shouldn't have said that. It came out of our mouth too fast, and then we see the look on the face of the person, hurt or angry, and so I think most of us are well acquainted with how our words can uh, have negative power, impact people negatively. So yeah, our words definitely have power. Of course,
The
our words have positive power too.
a more interesting question might be, do our words have spiritual power?
Yeah, yeah, and I think they do. I really do. And it's not surprising because your God made us in His image, right? And um, it seems like pretty much everything God does, He does through a spoken word. Creation is the great example. He said, "Let there be," and stuff happens. And so sometimes I think we figure God has His category of doing things, and we have ours, and they're completely separate. But if we're made in His image, then we should sort of expect that like God, our words also would have tremendous power, and not just how they affect people's emotions or their thoughts, but maybe something more than that.
So tell me how you're drawing the comparison, or why are you talking about words when when this whole topic of spiritual gifts comes up?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've divided spiritual gifts into two categories. So this week we're talking about spiritual gifts that are expressed verbally, and then in a couple of weeks we'll do spiritual gifts again. But those would be how spiritual gifts are expressed through our actions. And so we're just doing a delineation. And the reason we chose to do it that way is because the Bible does that. And I was surprised one day to find out that the Apostle Peter, in his first letter, fourth chapter, he divides spiritual gifts into two categories: words or deeds. And so he had the impression that those were the two primary ways they went out. And so I thought, what an interesting way to pursue it.
I like that because there are actually a multitude, there's several spiritual gifts lists in the Bible. And if you're approaching it more in a broader sense of spoken and unspoken, then it kind of encompasses these different lists.
It really does, all of them. And yeah, the four predominant lists that we know of are kind of in order of the New Testament. Is Romans chapter 12. Paul rattles off, I think 11, maybe 7, 9, I don't know. He rattles off a list of gifts. And then in his next letter, 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, three extensive chapters talking about spiritual gifts. He has a list in chapter 12, which does have 9. And the weird thing is some of those gifts overlap the gifts that Paul's already mentioned in Romans chapter 12. So it seems like Paul's not saying, I'm going to, in different letters, end up with a comprehensive list and mention them once. He just rattles off lists and repeats some of them. In his letter to the Ephesians, he in chapter 4, he has a list of 5 things that kind of like maybe expressions of gifts within people within the church. And then here, poor Peter, little Peter, has one brief little mention of gifts that we referred to earlier. If you count them all up, the most I've seen is like 25, somewhere 20 to 25, if you don't count the repeats. And there's a lot of theories that Paul's Romans 12 list is supposed to be a certain type of like personality traits, whereas the First Corinthians list is like power gifts. And I don't see the New Testament delineating. I think they're just saying here's stuff that happens when the Spirit works through us. And I think the way they came up with those lists was just through experience. They would gather together and worship, and maybe they're harkening back to when they were hanging out with Jesus. They would experience stuff, and they'd say, "Man, the Holy Spirit did that through me." And they started like making lists of stuff the Holy Spirit does when He lives inside of us. And if that's true, then I'm not sure it's necessarily a exhaustive list. It might be that there's more than 25. There might be spiritual gifts that Paul didn't bother to, maybe variations of gifts that he didn't bother to get into. But some people are like, well, what's the purpose of spiritual gifts?
Mhm, mhm.
Especially with,
What is the purpose of spiritual gifts?
well, sadly, the effect of spiritual gifts in the last 50 years has been to divide the church, because you had the charismatic Christians saying, hey, we're spirit filled. And then you had the non-charismatic Christians saying, look, we have the Spirit too, and stop acting like you're a higher category of Christian than I am. And then you had the charismatic Christians sort of evangelizing the non-charismatic Christians. Like, I want you to be a fuller Christian, so I'm going to baptize you in the Spirit. And so it ended up being this sort of controversial thing. It seems to have sort of leveled out. It seems like in the past 20 years. Which is sad, because everywhere the Bible talks about spiritual gifts, the context is always unity and us getting along and building each other up. So I guess it's not surprising if there's spiritual warfare connected to gifts that we would be fighting over it. It's just so bizarre. But
I have often heard different people say, I have the spiritual gift of this, and I have the spiritual gift of that, or I have the office of this, or I have the office of that. Would you care to explain some of that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is, Jesus talks about our words, and he says, pretty much, stop using your words to puff yourself up or to tear others down or to manipulate people or to get what you want. Jesus has just yes or no is enough. James amplifies that. Jesus says, no more oaths. Let's not swear by things. And so I don't think if we're operating in spiritual gifts, I don't think we have to tell people, because the gifts themselves are the fruit of that. And if we're using spiritual gifts to gain some kind of an identity, then I don't think they're gifts. I think they're gifts to us now. And the whole point of spiritual gifts is God giving gifts to other people through us. And
I want to pause right there. Say that line one more time, because I think that's really important for people to hear.
Spiritual gifts are to give away. They're not to keep. That's what a gift is. A gift is something that you give to somebody.
Are you ready, Boots? Start walking.